Hello, Critic Circle fans and members. I am Jade Entien. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am one of the Critic Circle's newest senior interns. And today, I have with me Christopher Byrd, a journalist for the Washington Post and core member of the New York Video Game Critic Circle. It's nice to finally chat with you, Christopher. I'm so excited.
Hello.
But before we move on, I just want to quickly open the floor to you. So give us the lowdown, give us a little bit of information about yourself. Who are you?
Oh, let's see. I'm a longtime writer, a professional writer. I've been publishing for 22 years now, since 2000. Um, I write a Sunday arts column for the Washington Post about video games, in which I try to emphasize the more artsy end of the spectrum, indie games, etc. And I'm also I've worked as a longtime literary critic and cultural critic as well.
All right, thank you, Christopher. So I guess I'll start us off with the first question. When did you first get into journalism?
Oh, let's see. That would have been about 1 year after graduating from college. I started off as a music critic, and that was basically happened all because of a fortuitous incident where I was at a concert for a group that I very much love, a group from New York called Blonde Redhead, and I ran into the members of the band. They were watching the opening act, and I just went up to them and I said, "Hey, I love your music. I was wondering if I could write about you." And the guy, the front man of the group, Amedio Pache, he was incredibly gracious to me. He gave me his number, and then that's how the career began.
Um, and you mentioned it was you started 1 year after you graduated college. Where did you go?
I went to Vassar College,
Oh, I've heard great things about Vassar. What did you study?
philosophy,
Philosophy.
and
Ooh,
minored in French.
oui, oui. um, so you majored in philosophy. What made you choose journalism? And writing reviews.
Um, I really fell into it by accident. I knew for a long time I wanted to be a writer, and essentially journalism just offered a quick way to um, get my work published and get it out there, and then I just sort of got hooked to doing that. But really, I just fell into it.
So let's hear about the timeline. You graduated, you became a music reviewer. Um, and where was, the middle ground before you got into game reviewing?
Oh, right. So after writing about music for it was only maybe a couple of years, then I became a literary critic, which I did for a, more than a decade. Um, and then what happened, the way I got into video game criticism was very much by accident. Um, in 2013, I wrote an essay for Al Jazeera about Grand Theft Auto 5, and a writer named Thomas Pynchon, whose book Bleeding Edge came out on the same day as Grand Theft Auto 5. And they both explored post 9/11 America. And I just had this crazy idea. I was like, oh, well, why not try to write an essay that looks at what like my favorite author has to say and my favorite AAA game series has to say about America. And the essay came out fairly well. So that was my first piece ever about a game. And then I didn't intend to write anything about games after that, but I was having lunch with the managing editor of the Washington Post, and at the managing editor at the time, and I just happened to mention him. I was like, hey, when I was coming into town, I noticed that in the Guardian they review video games. Why don't you guys do that? And he looked at me and was like, oh, you should pitch that. So that's how the column came about.
That's super cool, you know. Just if there's not, if there isn't there, if it isn't there already, you know, pitch it yourself. Make sure you like, this is like the new frontier. Let me just talk about it. Um, so let's learn a little bit about, you know, your childhood. You know, let's get into
Okay.
like your family roots. Like, who's been your rock? Who's been there for you? You know, yeah, who's been, you know, encouraging you to, you know, write your reviews?
Oh, I mean, my parents are incredibly supportive. Um, my From my father, I learned a lot about growing up about movie culture. I used to go to the movies with my father on average once a week, and then my mother really encouraged me to read and would buy me lots of books, and so I really owe my parents a great deal, certainly.
I love that. But speaking of books, you have a collection of, you know, a lot behind you. It's like really cool. Um, do you have any favorite books or like a favorite genre? What do you like to read?
Um, I like literary fiction, and I particularly like fiction that traffics in ideas. So I like philosophically inflected fiction that has really good sentences in it. My favorite, well, when I was a teenager, I would say that the writer who really got me into serious fiction was Dostoevsky. When I discovered Dostoevsky when I was like about 16 or so, I had no idea that fiction could be written like that. I had no idea that fiction could grapple with the most serious ideas and really talk about what it is to be human and all of those things that really have existential weight. Fiction that doesn't just try to entertain but tries to enlighten and to tries to um, show a complex view of life and of human personality and character. I mean, that was when I discovered that, it just blew my mind. Yeah.
Would you say that, you know, that kind of genre and that kind of, you know, psych that kind of like ideas, are those also what you look for when you're like writing video game reviews? Are you, do you like look at that when you're like playing video games just as you are when you're reading books?
Well, when I play video games, I tend to look at them as cultural productions, and I try to see like what does the game say, what are its underlying themes, what kind of values or perspective is it trying to show into the world. But let's just say this: video games are a very heterogeneous bunch. There's so many different types of games that operate in so many different types of ways. So, you know, you could have a game that really lends itself to sort of like an analytical interpretation about like what are its ideas, like something like the Stanley Parable. But then you just have something like, say, Splatoon, which you really want to zero in on its mechanical excellence. It's not something that you're looking for, like what does this game have to say about society? That's just ridiculous. So I think that I try to have a very flexible approach towards the video games I review, and I always try to tease out what is the most artful aspect of the game. You know. So in the example of Splatoon, of course, it would be its gameplay mechanics. Say,
Mm-hmm. Like each game has something different going on for them.
absolutely.
Definitely. um, so speaking of your game reviews, do you remember the first game review you wrote for was it the Washington Post where
Yeah,
you
for the
first
Washington
started?
Post. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. The first one I did for them was Destiny back in September 2014.
Oh.
Or is that no? Was it 14? Yeah, I think it was 14. Yeah.
And what was like the genuine, you know, reception of that? Like where everyone in the office, you know, what was it like when you started pitching video games? Was everyone on board? Were you come with like some conflict?
Well, No, the Washington Post, they were interested in the idea. I mean, I remember that to get it off the ground was a tremendous amount of work because I had to write three mock-up reviews. I had to review three games, and I got paid very little money to do so. And that was just to show them, like, that this could work. And then the Destiny thing was my first actual piece. I put a lot of time into it. Um, but I don't think that I began to get my sea legs until actually probably a little bit after that. Yeah.
Pretty sure we touched base on, when you write a video game review, what's it like? Um, but in your reviews, like, what exactly do you think readers should be looking for? Like, when a reader reads a video game review, what's something that should be highlighted?
That's a good question. And I would say that this applies to criticism in general. I don't I don't think that one should look for in criticism just to find one's own ideas and to have one's own prejudices or opinions simply confirmed. I think that the purpose of true criticism is to give you a new idea and a new perspective on something. It doesn't have to be something that you agree with necessarily, but you should read an article and it should show you something that you hadn't seen or considered before. That to me is the measure of good criticism. Of course, it shouldn't indulge in ad hominem attacks or spurious thinking or anything like that. But uh, yeah, criticism should try to push the needle forward with regard to whatever it's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, like when you write a review or when you read a review, look for new ideas based on, what you previously thought, because, how you think about one video game is not something another person would think about a video game. And that's really interesting. Um,
And
so,
then and then on it's just to build on that,
mhm,
there's a concept in philosophy that's very much dear to me. It's called dialectical thinking, and that involves looking at things from different perspectives,
mhm.
um, and then trying to synthesize the two perspectives together to come up with a brand new, fresh perspective. So I think that in hopefully criticism allows one to sharpen one's own ideas about something, so that either maybe you really agree with a point or maybe you disagree with a point, but whatever, it should bring you to a different place than where you were before.
And on that note, have you out of all your reviews, is there one that you really felt strongly about? Like a review that really touched with you?
You mean a piece I was particularly happy with?
Yes, that or something, felt you feel as if really made an impact. Like a lot of people, you feel as if it really changed the way people may be thinking.
Well, let's see. I know that one piece that I did that was really, really popular was about the first Life is Strange game.
Mm.
And in that piece, I basically argued that Life is Strange, the first one, answered a long-standing criticism that had been levied or that had been placed against video games for a long time, which was that video games couldn't produce a genuine emotional impact.
Mm.
And Steven Spielberg famously said, video games will reach a form of artistic maturity when someone can say, I cried during level, I forget, like level 13, And in my piece, I said, well, guess what? Life is Strange made me cry. It made a lot of people cry. There was a subreddit devoted to this question: Did Life is Strange make you cry? And there were all these um, adults on the thread saying that it did. So that to me was a big deal. I mean, I do not cry easily at all. I mean, from works of art or from entertainment. So yeah, I was happy with that one.
I like that. That's really sweet. Um, and I guess I'm just gonna ask because Life is Strange has been out for a while. And if someone like if you haven't had the opportunity to play it, I highly recommend it. It's really a really good narrative. It's got a lot of different themes to it. It's a very interesting game. But could you tell us like what part specifically made you cry, or was it just like the game in
Oh no
general?
no 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 no! I mean that's very easy. It was the ending of the game. Yeah,
Mhm.
right. So
Like you have like one of two choices, blah blah
yeah,
blah blah
exactly.
blah blah. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, right. But I think that there's only one choice, and it's a truly tragic choice, and
It
it's
is.
devastating.
Oh, I understand how that part could make anyone cry. It's just like you play the entire game and you're like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so let's move on to like the New York Video Game Critics Circle. Like, when did you first get involved with them? Like, how did you get on board?
Well, that happened through meeting Harold Goldberg, the founder of the Critics Circle. I met him at a press event for The Witcher 3. And we exchanged contact info, and fabulous friendship developed after that.
That is so sweet. Um, so what has it been like so far? Like, how long have you been with the circle? Since Witcher 3. Wait, let me do some quick calculation.
Yeah, so I guess it's 7 years, 6 years or 7 years, something around that. Yeah, because The Witcher came out in 2015, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have great things to say about The Witcher 3. Like, everyone's like, oh, it's like peak storytelling. Like, the graphics are amazing. And I'm like, it just keeps racking up. So many new things I'm learning.
Oh, it is. It's definitely one of the greats. Certainly, it belongs in the conversation of
Mm-hmm.
the one of the greatest role playing games ever made.
Heck yeah. Um, and you've been a mentor to students. You've been going to classrooms with Harold, you've been discussing things with students, either how to write or, what's there to focus on when you're writing video game reviews. What was it like? What's it like mentoring for you?
Um, well, it's great in the sense of I think that it's always a extremely worthwhile thing for adults to interact with younger people because there's an exchange of ideas. It doesn't flow one way. I mean, like that's what keeps you grounded in what's going on in culture, and it shows you a different perspective. It shows you what another generation thinks, and those that's worthy information for a writer to have for sure.
You mentioned the generational, learning what another generation thinks about video games. Um, has there ever been, a conversation you had about, the impact video games have had, throughout history, from like what video games you played when you were younger, up to video games that you play now? Have you ever talked about that? Like, hold on, I just said a bunch of different things.
No, no, no. Well, I can't honestly say that I've had a conversation about students with the impact that video games have had throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, I would sort of reformulate your question and say
Mm-hmm.
that the interesting thing to me about video games from a historical perspective is how um, the medium has very much paralleled other new and emerging forms of artistic expression in the sense that if you go back to it goes all the way back to the time of like the ancient Greeks and Plato when and the Republic. Plato famously exiled the poets from his ideal city because he argued that poetry could corrupt the minds of the impressionable youth. You see this type of anxiety expressed again and again with regard to new forms of art. when the novel was first emerging in the, I guess, the like 18th century and into the 19th century, there was a lot of worries that the novel would corrupt people, would corrupt their morals, etc. That people would spend all their time reading novels and they wouldn't be productive. And then when movies, uh, you know, really came into the forefront of popular consciousness in the early 20th century, the same thing happened again. People complained and they thought that movies were frivolous, etc.
Mhm.
And then, so obviously, the same thing happened to video games. And I'd say only now are we starting to see the sort of legitimization of games as a viable form of artistic expression. You know, that people don't just automatically assume that games are worthless. So
Mhm.
that's always fascinated me.
Most definitely, because it's always been the generational question amongst, adults who always have something to say about video games, majority negative. They're always like, oh, video games inspire violence, video games make children less productive. What they really fail to see is that, video games, like you said, are an art form. It's not just like the graphics or how the characters look. It's about like the story, the adventure, and what you can learn and take away from video games, such as, Life is Strange. Um, and even though there are a bunch of video games that do have like violent themes, they're also showing a message about how, oh, this is war, we should stop having war. This is like the effects of war. You see how many times your character is dying? Think about the people out there who are fighting. It's just video games have been challenged constantly because people fail to realize the deeper meanings between what people are doing. It's not just creating something for the money. It's creating something that will have like a lasting impression. And I really like that. And I feel as if reviews also capture capture that idea of, I played this video game and I believe you should let other people play this video game because this is what I realized. And you may realize something different. Um, but
Well,
100.
one thing I would say is I think that we've gotten to the point where video games don't need to be defended. Um, like it's fine that there are plenty of video games out there that one could hold up as examples of mindless entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. One can do the same thing for anything else. One can do that with books or movies. I mean, there are plenty of trashy novels out there that aren't meant to enlighten. They're just meant to get your pulse racing. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but at the same time, there's always in all art forms like a small subsection of art forms that is populated with people with very serious intentions that want to do more and that want to push things further. So uh, I'm not in the business of trying to say that all video games are great by any means. I just say, hey, let's look at video games as seriously as we would look at any other form of art.
Mm-hmm.
And if what we're looking at isn't that great, let's say it's not that great. But let's also be open to the fact that you know there are geniuses working in the field. So.
Definitely. Um, so still since we're still on the conversation of video games, you wrote a piece for the New Yorker about cyberpunk. And a lot of people were really excited about cyberpunk and then, bugs. And everyone was just like, shucks, look at my money. But you wrote, a thoughtful piece about it, and how long did it take you to write it again?
I researched that piece for over half a year, I'd say, easily.
Like for half a year. So, what were your initial thoughts when you were writing it? And do you think like after you wrote it, do you think Cyberpunk made any changes? Have you gone back to revisit it after your review?
Well, I played it on the PC and I played it on a fairly high end PC. So my experience was just radically different from other people who were playing it on a console. and I had a really good experience with it. Um, I'm used to playing open world games before they've launched, and I know that they can be very, very, very buggy. So I didn't encounter anything that was I thought, you know, beyond the norm. But like I said, my experience was definitely different from other people who played on console.
But was there anything about the video game that you thought was half a year writing worthy about it? You know, was what really so in your review, you know, what really stood out to you and what's something you want your readers to focus on
Um,
about, you know, your review?
well, it wasn't a review. It definitely was not a review of the game.
Uh-huh.
It was a piece about it was really a piece about how the game fit within the tradition of cyberpunk and about the reception of the game. I would say it wasn't about like, you know, this is that I thought that this was good and this was bad so much. It was about like how did this game fit within a larger cultural conversation. And uh, I would say along those lines, I think I think that it's an incredibly well written game. I think that it has some of the best like NPC interactions that I've seen. I mean, there are problems with. I mean, like the world when people criticize the world as being like, you know, somewhat empty. Sure, I think that that's true. But um, I also think that the game just really opened up a lot of conversations about, well, what do people expect from games? And there is this idea that, well, the game should have so many more things to do and all and etc. But I think that people often don't think about how hard it is to make new games. And
Mm-hmm.
also, people didn't consider the fact that this was like a brand new IP and that for CD Projekt Red, it took them, you know, The Witcher 3 didn't just happen. There's a humongous difference between The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 3. And so I think that you know, it's worth keeping that in mind when thinking about cyberpunk.
Rome was not built in a day. That is something I could definitely say. Um, but yeah, a lot of great things, a lot of negative things, but people just really need to focus on like, hey, video games take a lot of time, and they're putting it out there for you to play. You know, criticism is welcome. Um,
And this wasn't the first time that this had happened. And
yeah.
this is the point to really remember if you think about something like when Assassin's Creed Unity launched, or when Grand Theft Auto Online initially launched. I mean, people forget about this, but you know, when Grand Theft Auto Online launched, I mean, people thought, would this ever be playable? You know.
And now it is, and every time I get an airplane, someone shoots me down. um, but you wrote this piece about cyberpunk for the New Yorker, and a lot of people can say that the New Yorker is like this huge thing. It's like really good, and you know, a lot of people have had like trouble. You know, oh, it's hard to get published, or you know, what was it like? How did you get to write for the New Yorker?
um, how I got to write for the New Yorker? Well, very fortuitous circumstance. Um, Basically, my editor there, I I knew him before he went to the New Yorker,
Mm-hmm.
and I just knew him from the writing world. So when he went, um, I just dropped him an email and I asked him if I could do something, and that's how it happened essentially. But I'll say this: I mean, writing for the New Yorker was a long term goal that I had forever, and it took me many years to break in there. So don't give up. That's the lesson. and perseverance is everything.
So are you saying you tried to get in touch with the New Yorker before you contacted your editor?
Oh yeah. I mean, for a long time actually, I tried to get a job there as a fact checker, because I thought that would be a way to get my foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, obviously I didn't end up getting that job, but later on, just keeping in touch and just like thinking about that as like a long-term goal, it finally materialized.
And connections are very important when it comes to, getting places like, oh, the New Yorker, Washington Post, Critic Circle. It's all like building blocks. You gotta make your connection.
Yeah, you have to get yourself out there, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very important thing. um and also just to realize that the people that you're interacting with are people, and that having a personal connection is always better than not. um so in New York, here we're quite fortunate that uh, there's so many people who work in the world of publishing and entertainment, etc., and that those people they're around and you can meet them. So one thing that I would do, and this is something actually my mother encouraged me, is um, don't be afraid to go up and talk to people and to ask them about their experiences and how they got to where how they got where they were. Um, you can learn a lot. You might f- find a new friend, find a new mentor, etc.
I love that, just puck up. Hey, make a
Definitely.
conversation. um, so what did you first work as when you started working for the Washington Post?
I as a music critic, that was my first published stuff with them, was as a music critic, and then I did a book review for them, and then the video game stuff came later. Or yeah.
All right. Um, so give us like the deets. Are you working on anything right now? Like any big ideas for the future? What are you doing?
Um. Hmm. Let's see here. Oh, I can't really say exactly. All I can say is that I'm trying to do some more stuff for the New Yorker. What do you love most about video games?
Honestly, I used to be so obsessed with art. I still am obsessed with art. A lot of my friends, I go to an art school. So, just seeing different art styles really, gets me excited seeing different characters, but lore. I love reading and I love having to do my research
Mm-hmm.
because there will be 75 people telling you like, um, yeah, Argonians are doing this, and then the high elves are like this, and I'm like, uh-huh, uh-huh. I'm just like
Mm-hmm.
taking it all in because one, it feels great to be like all smart about it. Like, yeah, actually, technically, back in the day, just being able to, tell people what you know about video games, and they're like, you know a lot about that. And I'm like, yeah, it's just really nice to be able to talk about something as if you've been there since day one.
Right. Nice. What was the last game that really surprised you?
Oh, goodness. The last game, I would definitely say I'm recently playing Psychonauts, the first one.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are telling me, damn, Jade, it's a really good game. And I'm like, I want to try it out. I want to see what a lot of people are talking about. And I think it's really cute. But at the same time, I have this thing where when I play platformer games, I'm like, okay, let me just make sure I have everything I need. So in case my arm cramps up or something, I'm prepared because there's a lot of jumping, and then you're like, where do I go from here? Are there no instructions? And then you just like feel like rage quitting, but then you're like, you know what? You gotta be strong because it's a video game. There's gonna be parts where you get frustrated. Um, So yeah, I would just say Psychonauts, and I'm really excited to finish it, then get on to Psychonauts 2.
Nice.
So I guess I'll conclude us off with a little advice piece, Chris. Do you have any, other than, making connections and, just trying to get yourself out there, what other advice do you have for young journalists, especially journalists of color? There may be a lot of discrimination, like, oh, you don't know about that, you wouldn't be able to write about that. What do you have, what advice do you have for young journalists?
Um, my advice is, and I guess I'm tailoring this really to people who are interested in video games and interested in video game journalism, but it holds true from all journalism. Read widely, consume culture widely, because the more that you can bring into your account of whatever you're doing, the better. The more connections that you can bring, the better. I always think that, for instance, I tend to think that a lot of the best work written about art tends to come from people who, let's say, aren't professional art historians, but are more like poets. I think of the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke writing about the French sculptor Rodin, and that's like some like the best art criticism you can read, and it's because uh, Rilke is bringing a whole set of aesthetic values to what he's writing about, that were, informed by things outside of the context of specifically what he was looking at, like sculpture. So I would say the same thing. Like if you are interested in video games and you're particularly interested in the art aspect of it, go and study some art history, go and study some aesthetic theory, go and read some philosophy, do those things, because it will help you. It will enrich what you have to say. Because anyone can simply look at a game and just say, well, this is fun, this frame rate is bad, this isn't good. But it's like, if you can place games within a larger conversation, a larger framework of discussion, I think that's far more valuable.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher. It was so nice being able to talk with you, um, dig into your brain a little bit, just hearing about, your process, people who inspired you. Um, so yeah, I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jim.